This is the Canon RF 85 2.0. It's part of Canon's introductory RF lens lineup, so not only does it have a wide f2 aperture, but it also has image stabilization and macro abilities. And did I mention it's only $500? So in this video, I am putting this head to head with not one, but two L-series RF lenses that are worth over $3,500. Is this $500 lens sneakily the perfect option for wedding photographers on a budget? Or is this a complete waste of money for wedding photographers and it's really more for hobbyists and soccer moms? Sorry, we love you, soccer moms. So just a few disclaimers. I'm not a tech reviewer. You're not gonna hear the ins and outs of every single dimension of aperture blades. That's just not me, but what you are going to get is a more experiential review of what it actually feels like and what the results are like. But if you're looking for a techie tech review, that you're just in the wrong place. Another disclaimer is that we are not expecting that this guy at $500 is going to be better than these two. What we're trying, because they're $3,500 combined, like we know that these are better. What we're trying to do here is to figure out if you're on a budget as a wedding photographer, can this guy do the job of these two in a professional way? And is it professional enough to where a photographer could just get this lens and get something comparable, not exactly as amazing as what these two can do, but comparable and professional enough to carry them through a wedding day? Hey, if you struggle with posing, if it gives you anxiety, you feel overwhelmed and really insecure every time someone is in front of your camera, I have a free class that's gonna revolutionize the way that you approach posing. What I'm gonna do is teach you my proven posing system that's going to take your anxiety and turn it into confidence so that you can walk into every shoot knowing exactly what you're going to do and have creativity and never draw blank. Okay, back to the video. The reason why this is just my favorite lens in the world is because the 85mm 1.2 is just known for its amazing ability to separate the subject from the background. It's also super crisp. This creates, in my opinion, just magic. Beautiful magic. And we want to see if this can do something comparable to this in a portrait setting. So we're going to test out its portrait ability. Next, we're going to put it head to head with the 100mm macro and test out the Hallmark ring shot. It's basically the shot that wedding photographers, if you're going to use a macro, it's the shot that you probably need to know how to master. So we're gonna see how this stacks up in comparison. So the last thing that we're gonna test is image stabilization. So we're gonna just see, is the image stabilization built into this 85mm 2.0 lens even worth paying attention to? Can we notice a difference? In regards to the 85mm 2.0, I have used it around the house, photographing my kids, and my first impressions are, it felt real cheap on the end of my camera. When you're used to this guy, this just feels like a toy from Walmart. But that was really the only negative first impression. Okay, so here I am in my front yard with my trash cans. It's early, my eyes are puffy, and I'm trying out this 85mm 2.0 lens. And I will tell you, putting it on the camera felt real cheap. Oh, it's freaking out. Felt real cheap to me. I didn't enjoy putting the lens on the camera. It just felt so plasticky and light and not, I don't know, I think I've just got accustomed to like, oh, nice lenses feel heavy. But that's not true. It's doing a great job and pleasantly surprised. Its speed is impressive. I think that's what's most impressive. Its compression doesn't seem quite as impactful as obviously the 1.2, but the speed is awesome. So I really need to get it on my computer. I need to see these on my computer, I think, to really understand if the compression is making that big of a difference or not. And I was pleasantly surprised at what I was able to capture. The kids were moving. There was a lot of chaos going on, but I felt like in those quick few moments of testing it out, I was able to get shots that I was actually very proud of. And I did notice that, you know, for a prime lens that has this much compression, I thought it was nice to be able to have something like this on the end of my lens that didn't weigh as much as this. I mean, it is like night and day difference. And so that was nice. My initial response to those shots was that I was pleasantly surprised at how fast it focused in and locked in focus on the eyes of the kids. Sometimes when you have lenses like this that feel a little cheaper, I just assume it's going to be slower to focus, but it wasn't. So that was great. In comparison to photographing my kids with the 50mm 1.8, this did feel more professional. I don't know if it's because it's heavier. I don't know if it's just the way that it felt when it was focusing. Nothing wrong with the 50mm 1.8, but it feels like a toy lens. I will say that while it was so fun to pull this out really quick and take photos of the kids outside, that it's not a professional setting, and I realize that. And so we want to make sure we put it to the test in a more professional setting, testing out the things that it needs to have in its back pocket to be a great lens for a wedding photographer. So we're gonna go take some shots, test these things out. I'm going to bring the images back on my computer and tell you what we found out. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna test out the macro capabilities of the 85mm 2.0. I'm gonna start with a normal kind of wedding day setup. These are my rings, but this is something that I would shoot on a wedding day. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just getting a baseline. I'm using my 100mm RF macro lens to try to, like, this is what I would normally shoot at a wedding day. So I'm gonna kind of get a baseline here for what I want to be able to shoot and capture. So give me a second. I'm just gonna, you know, that's a little dark. I'm shooting at 2.8. I'm going to get as close as I would as if I was shooting on a real wedding day, because I think that's what my expectation would be, that I would want for a macro. All right, so now I'm going to put this guy on. We're going to see what it does compared to shooting with the 100mm macro that I'm so used to. Okay, already feels a little bit like, whoa, I gotta get really close. And that's just the difference between the 100mm and the 85. All right, so we're freaking out a little bit, getting close. We're struggling to focus. Hold on, let me make sure yep, I'm there. Okay, so let me see. Come on, do you see? It's struggling to find it. Let me back up some. I think it was too close. Yep, I was. Okay, well, I definitely cannot get, and maybe I just need to lower my expectations. Like, I can't get as close as I would like to get. This is about as close as I can get. Yep, right here is the limit. I am a little frustrated that I can't get closer, because what that means is that a macro shot, in order for it to feel like it's filling the frame for an average size diamond, I'm going to have to crop in a lot because I can't get any closer. So that is a little bit of a bummer. But once I'm at the correct distance that it will work, I'm as close as I can go. It is focusing rather quickly. I feel a little limited or like constrained. I can only get but so close, which means my macro shots are just going to have to be somewhat at a distance, which I think powerful macro shots have really strong composition. Like, you got to be close enough to fill the frame adequately, or else it's just kind of like this big frame with a tiny little diamond. So that is a little bit of a bummer that I can't get closer. Okay, just for comparison, I am going to shoot one with my 85. 85 1.2. It's not going to go well. Does not have macro capabilities, and this is a mistake. Yeah, I mean, that was not impressive. Don't even attempt to take a macro shot with that. That's not helpful. This is the best. This, compared to that, I mean, this does have great macro capabilities. It would allow you to do some great things. I'm just so used to the flexibility and the honestly how close I can get to my subject with this macro that this seemed limiting to me. But I'm sure when we look at the images, I mean, it's still a great macro shot. It's just not exactly how I wanted it to be, because I wanted to be able to get closer and change up the composition, and I couldn't. But this definitely is not going to contribute to the macro need at all. So now we're testing image stabilization. We're going to use the 85 1.2, and we're going to test out how its lack of image stabilization compares to the final product with the 85 2.0 that has image stabilization. So I'm going to take a picture of this fake plant in my room. So I'm just going to shoot with this because it has no image stabilization. I'm not going to try to hold it super still. I'm going to shoot normally. I actually will make it a little harder. I'll hold it out away from me to see what we get. So here we go. All right, welcome. Ty is my model because my models are at college. But it doesn't really matter. I could be taking a picture of a stump and it would still prove the point. But I do want to take a picture of a human, focus on the face, the eyes, and show you the difference between the 85 2.0 and the 85 1.2. I'm going to start by taking similar portraits at 2.0 with each lens, and then I'll take an extra shot at 1.2 just to show you the power of what this can do that this cannot. Okay, so here we go. We are still at 100 ISO. I'm going to take one shot of Ty, focusing on, what should I focus on? There's his face. Perfect. Got it for that. Let's go ahead and change this. Here we go. All right, Ty's looking at me. Great tie. Nice smile, and perfect. Now let's go ahead and do a 1.2 shot. So I'm going to increase my shutter to 1/1000 and do one more like this. Perfect. Ty got headshots for his website, and we have a great YouTube video. Okay, so now that we have all these examples, we're going to go in and compare them, see them on the computer screen, and see what truly is the difference between the 85 1.2, 85 2.0, and also compared to the macro 100mm to see what this is actually capable of when it comes to professional quality images for wedding photographers. All right, so we're back in the studio. I have the images that we'd used for the test between the two, actually 3 lenses, and I'm going to break down what we found. I'm going to tell you if they pass or fail in regards to could the 85mm compared to the other lenses pass the test of being used professionally as a wedding photographer. So we're going to start with the macro. We're going to take a look at what we shot here. First thing that I shot was with the 100mm macro at 2.8, and I shot this as if it was on a real wedding day. I used a little bit of foreground too to make it more interesting. But let's look at this one. That is as close as I would love to shoot for a real macro shot. And so that's kind of my expectation. You can see this is a little bit soft right here, but I mean, it's a great macro shot. This is in focus as well. It looks like the focus fell backwards a little bit there, but that could have been user error. This is another example of how close I like to shoot. So that's my standard. So jumping to the 85mm 2.0 macro was this. This is as close as I could get, and I tried to really push this. So zooming in, you can see that's not perfectly tack sharp, but also, I mean, look how far zoomed in I am. So I think for what we're working with, that looks great. And this is another option. Let's see if it's a little sharper. So there you go. I mean, I think in general, now this is the 100mm. I went backwards. You can see how it really focused on the facet of the diamond. You can even see the imperfection. That's why my diamond was affordable, was that imperfection right there. We're not getting that type of clarity here. But from a standard of like, you know, I'm paid to be a wedding photographer, I'm getting started on my journey, I would say from a macro perspective, I do think it passes. I think that this is, it's not as close as I would like, it's not perfectly as crisp as I would like, but compared to, let's look at what the 85mm 1.2 that has no macro capabilities, this is what some people are trying to do. They're trying to shoot macro shots like this. And that's just a nightmare. That's not even, that's just, we can't do that. So I do think that this guy passes the macro test. Check. Now we're looking at, we're dealing with image stabilization. And to be honest, as I uploaded these really quickly, at first glance, I didn't really notice much of an issue at all, but we're gonna go through this. So this is the 1.2. We're gonna zoom in. This was shot at 1/80th of a second. We're gonna zoom in right to where the focal length was. That's pretty crisp. You can see how fake the plan is. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So this was shot at 1/50th of a second. I think that's decent, nothing too crazy. This was shot at 1/15th, and you can start to see we're losing a little bit of the detail because there's a little bit of a blur here. It's not bad by any means, but there's definitely something going on there. All right, so now we're moving to the 85mm macro 2.0. And so this is shot at 1/80th of a second. All right, you can still see the fine detail of the leaves. This was at 1/50th. We have a little bit of a loss of detail right there, and then at 1/15th. Now 1/15th, in my opinion, that makes it seem like the 1/50th was just a focus error. But 1/15th is pretty darn sharp. So I mean, if this was someone's face, those would be pores. So that's pretty impressive. I am impressed by that. Okay, so image stabilization, it passes. I would trust this. I think in general, it's important to realize that image stabilization for wedding photographers is really going to come into play with macro shots the most. What we found with this is that it does have impressive image stabilization, but I wouldn't let that be the driving factor that makes you choose this over, like, if you can afford the 1.2 and it's in your budget, then I would definitely do the 1.2. I don't feel like the image stabilization is going to make this skyrocket above the others. It's just a note of, it is noticeable. It is a great feature of it. It adds value to the lens and gives it another check mark, getting closer to it could be professional level. All right, so now we're going to dive into looking and comparing the portrait ability of the 85mm 2.0 versus the 1.2. The first image we're going to look at is full body, shot at 2.0 with both lenses, same setting, shot seconds apart from each other. And the first thing I noticed looking at the screen is, honestly, it looks like a little bit of an exposure difference and a little bit of a color change difference. So both were shot exact same settings, exact same place, just with different lenses. And look how much more open and brighter you can see in the shadows of his face versus here. And you could say maybe his chin was up a little bit more, but in general, when you squint and look, there's more of a blue, maybe even slightly more magenta tint on the left. Why don't we zoom in and look at clarity, and I would even say the bokeh, the fall off of, which is, sorry, Ty had plastic from his decade-old headphones stuck to his neck. That's not a bug crawling up. But if you look here at the bokeh in the background, this, I do think it's significantly creamier with the 1.2. I also notice a little bit more, and maybe this is just me, y'all can tell me if you see it, but I feel like there's a little bit more of potential of chromatic aberration, a little bit there. I was focusing on his face, so this would have been, but I was shooting from so far back, so it makes sense that this is still somewhat in focus. Yeah, I mean, I think in general, if you could never compare to the 1.2, I think you would look at the 2.0 and say like, oh, that's great. That's great, because it is great. Comparing to the 1.2, I do feel like I lean towards loving the creamier bokeh. But I do think both are equally pretty sharp. I don't see a drastic difference in that. So yeah, let's look at another example. All right, so this is comparing the 2.0 and shooting 85mm 2.0 at 2.0, and then the 85mm 1.2 shooting it at 1.2, just to show you the difference. So you can see the way that it just falls. And also what's interesting is I did adjust my shutter here because obviously I went down to 1.2. So there is a slight setting change here, but in general, I just love how the 85 1.2 naturally, like the skin, it's just brighter. It's just a brighter lens. I think it's super crisp. It's a crisp lens at 1.2. I mean, you can see every single, no offense, every pore in his skin. I mean, I think that's the goal, is to have crisp, tack sharp images. And I just love the bokeh. I mean, some people would look at this difference between the bokeh and say that doesn't really matter to them, but that the creaminess here is what I love. So in general, does the 85mm 2.0 pass the portrait lens test for weddings? Well, sure, 100%. Like it's wonderful. And I would give it a check that it passed. And so that means it passed in general. So what do we learn from all this? If someone came to me as a student and said, I'm thinking about getting the 85 2.0 for the RF 85 2.0, do you think that's going to could I use that on wedding days? Could I use that as a macro lens? Is it going to be okay for portraits? My first question would be, well, I want to make sure you have a portrait lens that has more flexibility and not just at an 85mm focal length. But other than that, I would say, I actually think it's a great fit. And if I had the choice of having this in my bag versus my 85 1.2, I wouldn't get rid of my 1.2 because I do love shooting so wide open. And I do love the wall of bokeh, and this is just forever my favorite. But I am impressed with the 85 2.0. I'm impressed with its clarity, its sharpness. The color seems a little bit off, but for someone who's seeking that 85mm look for portraits and who may also need a macro capability and is trying to pursue wedding photography, it's an amazing choice. It gives you two different capabilities in one lens as a wedding photographer. So you wouldn't have to go out and buy the macro automatically. This would do a good enough job for probably several years of your career. And it's only $500. So my setup cost me $3,500. You could do this for $500. And honestly, looking at the difference, I mean, I'm nitpicking some of these portraits side by side. You can't really tell that big of a difference. Maybe another thing to consider with this also is if you're wanting to take really beautiful epic portraits with lots of compression, because you love that, this is a lot easier to throw into a bag to go to the lake or to go to a sports game rather than taking this guy. And I would even say also, it's a lot less to handle than this. So, you know, I was going to buy this and see if I liked it, and if not, return it. I missed that window, so it's mine now. And so I would say This would be a fun lens to take out on the lake, to take somewhere where, you know, it's not going to be as stressful. If something kind of happens to this, it's not as stressful as if it happens to this. So I do think there's elements of everyday life that you could find possibilities to use this lens where it would be a really good fit. Let me just say, what's a scenario where this wouldn't be a good fit? If you're doing product photography, if you are constantly renting the 100mm macro and you're needing that for shoots and you're just shooting really tight product shots or detail shots, this is not something that I would recommend. I think it's enough to get a wedding photographer through the need of macro shots at the beginning of the day of some detailed jewelry. But I don't think a product photographer or a brand photographer that needs to shoot tight details, I don't think this is what you're going for. So I would stay away from it if that is your world. But for a wedding photographer, it is a great option. So final conclusion, this was fun. I'm glad you got to see the difference. I think that it's interesting to compare something that has such a different price point, but also has very similar capabilities. And I hope it was helpful for anyone who's trying to figure out, okay, I want to grow my lens collection. I want to make smart choices. And by the way, this is not even, we're not sponsored by Canon. Canon, if you ever watch this, we'd love to be. If you ever want to pay attention to us, it's fine. But this is not sponsored. It's just to help you out. And I hope it will help you make a decision in the future. So if this was helpful, like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.